Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're tuning in. This is week two's edition of Tailgate Trash Talk, brought to you by Backyard Sports. How you doing, Bentley?
I'm great, man. I'm. This is my flu game. I'm battling back from illness.
So you're gonna go
I
for 60 tonight, right?
yeah. I decided to take on Mother Nature 1v1 head to head, and she won. That's all right.
She usually does.
Yes, yes. Unfortunate.
Well, hey, we got some good football to talk about. I know we talked a little bit last week about kind of week zero, the new tradition of college football, some games to start the season before the official week one. But we've got official week one football, and we had a lot of games this past weekend. I want to kind of get your thoughts. What are some games that maybe stood out to you? What are some of your takeaways from week one? I think we learned a lot,
Yeah.
some good, some bad, about a lot of teams. There's of course some teams that are still kind of up in the air. Maybe a stuck in the mud performance against an inferior team, and they snuck away with a win, and we still don't know a lot about them. Talk to me about maybe one of your big takeaways from week one.
So there's never been a
Yep.
conference. There's never been a conference to win their first 13 games of a season until this year, and it was the Pac-12.
Of course, it's the one that's leaving.
Yeah, the one that is no longer. It's gonna be the Pac-2 next year. Which I think they should do. They should do a Pac-2 and just have them play like 6 times, including a championship game, like a best of 7 almost. But that's not my takeaway, right? Winning 13 in a row, that's not even that impressive. I think my biggest takeaway is that the ACC is the best conference in college football this year. North Carolina beating South Carolina and Duke beating Clemson and Florida State beating LSU. Those were clearly the 3 biggest wins of the weekend, and you cannot convince me otherwise that the ACC is not the best.
This is Overreaction Tuesday.
It is. It is. It is. No, I think probably my biggest takeaway is that there are some players on the field, teams specifically, not necessarily players, that are going to be different names than what we historically see, right? Oregon scored 81. We had multiple teams, Ole Miss and Oklahoma, both scored in the 70s. Ohio State struggled with Indiana. Their quarterback room looks a little shaky. Texas, who I gave out as a playoff team, struggled to really move the ball. Like Quinn Ewers looked just all right. And he has to go into Tuscaloosa next week. So there's some teams this year. Obviously, Clemson is not the team that everybody expected them to be going in. LSU kind of looks like they took a small step back, at least in week one, right? Playing against a very good Florida State team. But there are going to be some teams and some players this year that are different than what we're used to seeing at the end of the season, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I think maybe my biggest takeaway of the weekend is that I have a little bit of crow to eat and an apology to issue, both in the ACC. So yeah. I told you, last week that I was going to put Clemson in the playoff because I thought the ACC was that bad that without DJ, they were going to be much better on offense. I like Cade Klubnik. I think he's running into the same problem after week one, looking at what Oregon State did with DJ under center and what Clemson didn't do with Cade Klubnik under center. I think we're running into maybe it's Clemson. Maybe they're the problem. Maybe it wasn't DJ the last 2 years. And I gave him a hell of a time on this show all the last 2 years because he just wasn't good, right? He played very poorly in Clemson under center, but he looked really good up there in Oregon and playing for the Beavers now as opposed to playing for the Tigers there in South Carolina. And it's same old for Clemson. It's, you sent the meme of basically, am I going to run it off tackle right or am I going to run it off tackle right? And Dabo's sweating trying to decide whether he's going to run that Tecmo play or not. And that's what it felt like. Very predictable, very vanilla on offense. I think they were really counting on being able to get their offensive line going, and they couldn't. Duke is probably going to be better than me. I know I gave them credit for. I didn't expect them to really compete with Clemson. I didn't think that they were going to be a powerhouse. I know they've got Riley Leonard, but I didn't think that roster was really reloaded the way they needed to follow up a 9-win season, but it's clear that they got a couple of dudes in the transfer portal, and as long as they can stay healthy, that's going to be a tough team to compete against. Elko got them playing really well. He's a guy who can rally the troops. It's clear. But they've got some guys on the back end of that defense that can really run and give a lot of problems to guys trying to go over the middle or trying to go over the top. So they're going to be tough. They're going to be a tough out. It's clear that the AP poll respects them. They moved up into the top 25 after a big win against Clemson. When you blow out the number, they were 9, I think Clemson was going into the week. It's expected, right? The biggest surprise for me, maybe out of the AP poll this week, was the fact that Clemson stayed in the top 25. And I think that's respect, right? That's the history, the respect. I've got probably 4 teams behind them that I would have, if it were me, moved into the top 25. One of those 4 would have moved them into the top 25 and moved Clemson out. But it is what it is. I don't know what Clemson can do going forward, because I don't think a Tiger can really change its stripes at this point. I think this is just Dabo and what he does. And I had the conversation a little bit with you. I had the conversation with my brother, and then I had the conversation in another group chat. It's clear that everybody's starting to maybe catch on that those national championship runs may have just been Clemson really recruiting very well. Because when you have 4 pros at wide receiver and Hunter Renfrow and Mike Williams and Taj Boyd and T. Higgins, or Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins, I mean, I could probably throw for a couple thousand yards with those guys, right? So, and you add to it the quarterbacks that they had, obviously, with Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. I think right now we're seeing the curtain really get pulled back on Dabo and the boys, and he's no longer driving the bus, right?
Yep.
It's clear that he's no longer driving the bus.
I got a fun number for you. Talking about those championship teams from Dabo Swinney. Dabo Swinney's record as a head coach with Brent Venables as defensive coordinator was 121-17. His record without him is 40-23.
Yeah. Stove and I last year talked about it, right? How much it was going to be a big loss for Clemson losing Venables, and those numbers right there, prove it out more than we could even put into words. Really, you look at it, and it's the proof is in the pudding, right? He's a different. When you don't have a defense that's creating a ton of turnovers and creating good field position, maybe you just can't rely on an offensive line to run the ball down people's throats. And what's even crazier is that they did create turnovers last night. They did give short fields, but then they go and turn the ball over inside the 10. They had 2 fumbles inside the 10.
Yep.
They had bad penalties that set them up for field goals instead of touchdowns. And then, of course, the kicker struggled, freshman kicker. It's hard to have a 4-year guy and then you bring in a freshman and just expect him to be the same guy, right? It's not gonna work.
Yep.
But that's my crow that I've got to eat. Obviously, Clemson is probably, at this point, they're on life support in terms of any sort of playoff hope. But the apology I've got to issue in the ACC is kind of the polar opposite. I didn't think Florida State was the 7th best team in the country. I didn't think Florida State was going to be that good this year. I didn't think that they really were assembling the talent that they needed to. I vastly underestimated his name's eluding me on the spot, but the wide receiver they brought in from Michigan State, that dude is uncoverable.
Oh, yeah.
Uncoverable. Jackson, I think is his name. Deion something Jackson or Johnson. But he is just uncoverable. Jordan Travis looks super comfortable in the offense this year, as opposed to at times last year he looked uncomfortable. Norvell's got them playing well. He's another guy that can really rally the troops. I thought they were still a couple years away from being Florida State again. But the way that defense was flying around against an LSU team that has a lot of firepower on offense with Jaden Daniels and the weapons they've got on the outside and the running backs they've got in the backfield, that Florida State defense was flying around the field. It looked like a lot of those kind of older, Bobby defenses where they had speed all over the fucking place, flying around. Antrell Roll and all those guys that, were just unbelievable. I apologize, Florida State. I owe you that, because you fucking took it to LSU, who obviously was in the SEC championship last year, and I think people were expecting big things from them on the back of that and the good offseason that they had. But Florida State fucking took them out behind the woodshed and gave them the old Yeller treatment.
Yep. Keon Coleman is the receiver.
Coleman.
Yeah, from Opelousas, Louisiana. Who, if anybody's familiar with Louisiana, that is LSU recruiting hotbed right there, Opelousas.
Yep.
I mean, you don't grow up a stud in Opelousas and not go anywhere but LSU. But LSU did not offer Keon Coleman coming out of high school, and so he went to Michigan State, as you mentioned, and then transferred to Florida State and had 9 for 122 and 3 touchdowns on Sunday night, and said, "Hey LSU, fuck
you. Yep.
Should have brought me in.
Suck on these.
Yeah,
birds.
I mean that was an incredible game, and just an incredible performance really by Florida State, and kind of put the world, like, we knew they were going to be good, right? Because they were good at the end of last year and they came in ranked really high. But I'm not sure that anyone, myself included, I'm not sure that anyone really expected them to go out and dominate like that.
Yeah.
To hang 45 on an opponent.
Shut them out in the second half too.
Yeah, the second half shutout on what was technically a neutral site location.
Yeah.
But it's in your home state. Like, that's not really
it's like an hour down the road.
Yeah, it felt like a Florida State home game.
What are they, 11-0-2 now in that stadium, or 12-0-2 now in that stadium?
Probably.
Or in that
Probably. That seems right.
Yeah, right in there.
Yeah, I mean, it like, I think they're probably the team to beat in the ACC, and I know that's not necessarily a hot take, right? The ACC, as we all know, despite my joke to open the show, is not the greatest conference in the world. I could realistically see by the end of the year only having like 1 or 2 ranked ACC teams, depending on how Duke and Clemson finish out the year, and maybe North Carolina State if they can string together some wins. But like Miami, I mean, people are up on Miami this year, but people have been up on Miami since 2004, and it just hasn't worked out for them. But I think that the LSU loss really sheds light on maybe just how overblown they were last year. People like to bring up, they beat Alabama. It's like, yeah, but that was a 1-score game. It was a 1-point game, right? Because they went for 2, because Brian Kelly went for 2 in overtime to win that game in Death Valley. And then, so that propelled them to the championship game where they lost to Georgia, obviously. And people were like, oh, man, LSU, Jaden Daniels opened the year second best odds to win the Heisman. Like, what is that about? I don't know. They have a quarterback on their roster, and I cannot remember his name. He backs up Jaden Daniels, but I heard a lot of national pundits talking before the year started that they could envision a world where Jaden Daniels is not the starting quarterback at the end of the year. And it's like, anytime you're talking about that, it's like, dude, is this team really going to be that good? And then they open up the year at 5 in the country. And it's like, man, that's a lot of respect for a team that kind of got lucky down the stretch last year, if you remember properly, or at least in my opinion.
Yep.
And then they come out and get handled by Florida State. And it's like, well, maybe the top of the SEC isn't as great as people thought it was going to be this year. But again, only time will tell. Yeah,
it could be. You could end up with a situation where LSU may have been a bit overblown, and it's going to be Georgia and Alabama again, as it's been. Mm-hmm. Tennessee, though, kind of looked the part. They still have athletes there. They lost some really big-time athletes in Hyatt and, the receivers that they lost, the offensive linemen that they lost to the draft.
The quarterback.
But they seem to have reloaded. And, yeah, they had fifth-year starter in Hendon Hooker and lost him. And, say what you want, about Bazooka Joe, but he can throw a strawberry through a fucking battleship, man.
Yeah.
It may not always get to where he's trying to get it to, but he's fun to watch when he just unleashes a fucking 70-yard Scud missile.
Yeah.
They may struggle at times with that offense because to stay in rhythm, you've got to be accurate and get the ball out on time. But they're going to be fun to watch at times as well because he's going to be unleashing just ICBMs coming from fucking out of orbit, landing in the end zone. I mean, he unleashed one this weekend at 62, I think it was, air yards. It's like, come on, man. take
This
it
is
easy,
silly.
yo. Take it easy.
It didn't even look like he's stressed throwing
No,
that ball.
she's like,
Just flick the wrist. Yeah, he's fun to watch for sure.
Man. Crazy.
The another quarterback that's really fun to watch is Drew Aller, right? Aller.
Yep.
In Penn State over there in Happy Valley. They seem to have finally got a guy that can keep up with the rest of the talent on that roster. They're going to be tough, and I know you had him in the playoff, right?
Yep.
I don't want to spoil our big war later, but I've got them as probably my first team out right now. And they're going to be a contender for sure. I could see a world where they beat Michigan and Ohio State, and I'm not super shocked just given week 1 performances, right? But I definitely could see them beating Ohio State. I'm probably going to pick them in that game whenever that comes up later in the year.
Yeah, because you mentioned the quarterback room looks really, really spotty there in Ohio State. And I'm surprised, but I think this is maybe some vindication or at least reinforcement of the fact that they didn't name a starting quarterback, right, until like kickoff, essentially.
Yeah.
And sometimes you look at it and you say, like, okay, it's a coach kind of playing coy and posturing. Like Nick Saban does this because he's fucking Nick Saban and he does whatever the fuck he wants.
Yep.
But, you look at what, Ryan Day's had over the last, 5 years since, Herb has, got ran out of town.
Yeah.
He's had steady quarterback play, and they've been able to really lean on that when they need points. They can just go to the passing game because they've got a stocked wide receiver room. They've had it for 10 years, right? A decade. They've had just studs there at wide receiver, but they don't have the quarterback this year. And McCord looked really lost against what is probably going to be a middle of the road Indiana team. They may go 500 in the Big Ten if they're fortunate to go 500, and they'll get in a bowl probably because they'll win their out-of-conference games. They've got a pretty easy out-of-conference schedule, but that's not an Indiana team that should be holding Ohio State basically down, right? I mean, they looked really bad at times during that game, out of sync. It's a mess, there, and I don't know what the solution necessarily is, because if you can't get steady quarterback play, it's going to be a struggle there in that Big Ten, because you've got some pretty good defenses they're going to face this year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of people who, you have your Ryan Day haters and you have people that really like Ryan Day, but there's almost a general consensus, I think, from both sides that he's a guy who's just bored on third base, right? He gets handed the keys to this Ferrari, and it's almost like he's trying to run it off the track right now. With this lack of quarterback recruiting. Now, that could all change. Like maybe this McCord kid figures it out and is a stud by the end of the season. Those specifically Marvin Harrison Jr., who went out with an injury, and we hope he's okay. But maybe those guys kind of string him along throughout the season until it really starts to click for him and the game slows down. As we hear so many people talk about quarterbacks, and the game slows down and they can see it moving at a slower pace than they really figure it out as the year goes along.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad mentions Alfred State. That's where I played baseball there, and my dad lives right there down the street. They opened the season with a win. They beat Misericordia.
Nice.
They're D3, so you may never have heard of either of those teams. But
did they cover though? That's the question.
Shout out the hometown. I don't know. I don't have the D3. I am a D-Gen. I don't know that I'm that much of a D-Gen.
Because everybody knows that good teams win, but great teams cover.
Yeah, exactly.
Shout out Penn State, covered 6 seconds ago.
Yeah, that was crazy. And what's maybe the most funny about it is, like, they were kind of just playing the game out, letting a veteran guy get some snaps because he's not played much in his career. He's been at Penn State for, I believe, 4 full years now. And they were just kind of letting them run the offense, and they got down there and they snapped the ball with like 8 seconds to go, and the offensive lineman gets behind him, pushes him into the end zone, and it's the old cover play, right, as SVP would call it. And if you had the other side, it's a bad beat, but I was on Penn State's side, and I'm sitting there like, are they actually going to score? Are they actually going to try to score and cover? And maybe James Franklin had the spread and needed it, but that was an interesting sequence of events, because you get the garbage time touchdown that was kind of a broken play, and then Penn State just kind of keeps matriculating the ball down the field, to quote Vince Lombardi.
Yeah.
And he end up in the end zone, and we cover and we cash, and my bank account appreciates it.
Speaking of teams that cover, I think we should take this opportunity to mention the largest cover of the weekend. As a matter of fact, it was a 20.5-point underdog that won the game outright.
Yes, sir.
And everybody knows who I'm talking about here. It is none other than the Colorado Buffs.
Yes, sir.
Shout out Deion Sanders. Shout out Primetime. Shador Sanders comes in, sets a school record 510 passing yards. Had 4 different receivers with over 100 yards, including a guy that played 120 snaps because he plays both ways, and Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
I mean,
he actually ended up too, if you count like penalties and dead plays, he ended up with like 145 technically like snaps, but 120 official plays in the game. That's fucking unbelievable.
Yep.
I was telling my brother, like, I played both ways in high school, but I played quarterback on offense and I played corner on defense, right? So I wasn't running routes on offense. And we weren't playing 120, 150 snaps in a game like you do in college, right? We're 8-minute quarters. We probably played 75 plays combined throughout the whole game, special teams and everything. And I'd be gassed as fuck after a game at 16, 17 years old, man. This guy is running at Division I level too, right? Like, it's a totally different ball game.
Yep.
It's unbelievable. And like, he didn't seem like at the end of the game, like he was like, yeah, I'm tired or whatever. He's like, no, we're just gonna do this thing. And it was 100 degrees.
Yep.
Like, Jesus Christ.
Yep. I can only imagine.
And I want to emphasize too the 5'10" and setting a school record there at Colorado. Like, this isn't some shabby school that's like never had a good quarterback.
Right.
Like, they had Cordell Stewart, they had Joel Klatt, who was good enough. He's now a guy who's trusted to be an analyst on TV. Like, they've had some good quarterbacks at Colorado. Maybe not the best, right? You don't know Colorado for their quarterbacks, but this is a school that's won a national championship as well, right? Yep. And not back in 1930. They won it in 1990. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Travis Hunter, to quote Prime, like, he is him, dude. He is him. And legitimately, if they'd have hit him on those 2 touchdowns that they missed on, those 2 deep balls that just – one was a little overthrown, the other was a little contested, and it should have been maybe both of those are certainly catchable balls with their difficult catches. We might be talking like the Heisman might really be chilling at the crib, as Deion put it.
Yep. Oh, yeah. I mean, that was one of the more exciting college football games I've ever watched.
Oh, it's incredible.
And it happened at noon on week 1 on Fox.
The first window.
Like, that doesn't happen.
No.
Those are New Year's Eve bowls on ABC, right? Like, that's Georgia, Ohio State last year in the playoff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this was week 1 at noon with Gus Johnson and
they had the right crew on too.
Yeah,
right?
I forget who the color guy was, and I apologize.
Gus is the man.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah,
but that was the most impressive game, I thought.
That's another one my bank account appreciated. Prime, if you're listening, you don't have to come at me like you did the ESPN reporter, because I believed before the game started. I put my money where my mouth was. I mentioned it last week on the show that I was going to take a money line, and I did, and we cashed out plus 800, big time win for the weekend. We appreciate everything that Colorado was able to do for us this weekend.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's shift gears. Let's talk about week 2. We've got some games coming up. Some big matchups. Not a lot of top 25 matchups themselves, but we got some nice out of conference matchups, and of course we've got some cupcakes. But here's the slate. Here's our picks. I'll leave them up there for a moment. Everybody can kind of take a look. We've got some big lines, right? Georgia 40 points. We've got Washington's favored by 34, but there's some good ones in there, right? We've got Bama, Texas. Mm-hmm. We've got Oregon, Texas Tech. For some reason, they're going into Lubbock and only getting a tug. Let's see what else we got. Wisconsin against Washington State is an interesting one because Wisconsin struggled a little bit last week with Buffalo, but they're still ranked I think they're 18 right now. So I want to ask you, Duke obviously playing their first game ranked. They get a nice cupcake opponent in Lafayette. What do you think this week? What's one game? Notre Dame, NC State's another one, right? Another kind of tight matchup there.
Yeah.
What's one of these matchups you want to talk about that you're gonna look forward to this weekend as into week 2?
So this is a matchup of two opponents. One of them is 0-1 and one is 1-0, right? I'm talking about Utah and Baylor coming into this week. Now I did take Utah -7.5 because I do think they're the better team, right? But it's on the road. It's at Baylor. Baylor has, we all know the history of Baylor, right? Art Briles, the whole scandal, Sean Oakman, the picture of him standing there with the shirt half off, just looking menacing as hell, right?
Scary human being.
Yeah, just freak athlete, right?
6'7", 3 bills, and shredded.
Yeah, just ridiculous. This game could be very interesting, right? Baylor's a Big 12 team, so they're always going to be able to score points, right? Like that's a thing that we know. Big 12 teams can score points. We saw it. TCU, they bounced back. They lost 11 starters, and they still scored in the 40s this week against Colorado, right? Baylor scored 31 at home this week and lost. Excuse me. Baylor scored 31 at home this week and lost. And Utah won at home against Florida last week, right? A team whose offense kind of struggled. As we saw, they struggled to get Pearsall involved in the big plays. They really struggled to run the ball at all against Utah. Like you had mentioned in the preview, they were going to suffocate them on defense, right? So my biggest thing here is like, is Baylor going to be able to score points against that Utah defense? Even though I said that Big 12 teams can score points, right? Florida is going to score a lot of points this year. They just are. Their offense is not that bad. They just really struggled on the road in Salt Lake City. The altitude at night, nobody wins at Utah. We gave that pick out at Cast, right? Yep. This is a game that I'm pretty excited for. Is nobody knows if Cam Rising is going to play or not. So if Cam Rising doesn't play and Utah only scores 24, are they going to have the firepower to match up to Baylor, who's going to be able to score points, right? Like their quarterback, I think, was the number 2 or 3 rated quarterback, like QBR wise, coming out of the weekend, Ben Shaden, or I believe it's Ben.
Shapen.
Yeah, Shapen. 21 for 31, 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like that's nothing to shake your stick at, right? Like that's a pretty good line. And if he's able to replicate even like 3/4 of that against a good Utah defense, I think that they could give him some problems. Now, I fully expect Utah to win this game, by at least 8 points, and I hope that they do. But I do think the game is very interesting, especially if Cam Rising does not play.
Yeah, for sure. And I caught wind that Shapen might not play, so I had to hop onto ESPN. It looks like he's going to miss a couple of weeks. So.
Oh, is he really?
Unfortunately, I hadn't seen that he was going to have an issue until yesterday late. I just caught it on
MCL
talking about it. So looks like they might be without him, so it might be a bit more of a slog. But I'm with you. Baylor could surprise them for sure because I think Baylor's better on defense than most Big 12 teams, and it stems right from the head coach on down, that mentality that they're breeding there and building in Baylor. But Utah's tough. However, if they don't have Cam Rising, we saw this weekend that offense is not the same without Cam Rising. It's less explosive. They don't have as much of the mobility, despite the fact that they got some decent production out of the quarterback spot in the running game, but not what they get with Cam Rising. And they're really kind of built as an offense to kind of let him do his thing. They're really strong at tight end over the middle, but they're not super strong on the outside at wideout. So it's not a drop back, dime you up kind of offense. It's very much built for Cam Rising to do his thing. But this one, I'm with you. I'm laying the 7.5. But I know that Baylor's tough in Waco. I know that they've got a defense that can creep up on you and surprise you a little bit, despite being in the Big 12. And I fully anticipate they're still going to threaten to score points. It's really going to be a matter of whether that Utah defense can replicate what it did against Florida. It was absolutely suffocating against Florida. And I know they had the advantage of the altitude. They had the advantage of being at home at night. That's a raucous stadium at night. But yeah, no, this is a good matchup. Spread being 7.5, I think that could be a sweat. I don't think that Utah will run away from them. I think it'll be a fairly tight game. I don't feel as confident about this cover if I'm playing, if I'm actually putting some ducats on Utah. I don't feel as confident about this cover as I did last week against Florida.
Yeah.
One game I want to highlight, I mentioned it to you briefly before the show, is Oregon at Texas Tech playing in Lubbock.
Mm-hmm.
Only getting 6.5. I want to remind the viewers that this is an Oregon team that just scored 81. And I know like they weren't playing a super tough opponent, but 81 is 81, man. Like that offense was humming. It's not you like playing 7-on-7, it's not easy to score 81 points in a game. Playing in practice against a shadow defense, it's not easy to score 81 in a game. So, Oregon was humming up and down the field. They were clicking on all cylinders, offense, defense, and special teams. This number feels a little bit disrespectful, in my opinion.
Yeah.
A Texas Tech team that just lost to basically an FCS team in Wyoming. I don't know where the 6.5 comes from. And this feels like a Vegas trap number. And I hate when I feel like it's a Vegas trap number, because I'm like, I should put a lot of money on this, right? I should put a few units on this game because the number feels disrespectful. But then I have to like stop myself and pause and think like, what does Vegas know that I don't know, right? So I'm curious your thoughts on this one, because I don't know what it is. Texas Tech, to me, they're kind of a mid-major team in a major conference, but they're not a team that scares me if I'm Oregon. Is Bo Nix like suspended, or is there something I'm missing here?
Dude, I don't know, because you mentioned how difficult it is to score 81 points. It's infinitely more difficult to score 81 points on offense, right? Like you can score 81 points in a game if you have a couple pick sixes or whatnot. I'm going through the scoring summary. This is all offense.
Yes.
There are no defensive or special team scores. This is all offense.
Yep.
And a lot of them are runs, which is like the clock's running, right? Granted, the new rules always runs. Yeah.
It's exploding with runs.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited for this game. I agree with you. I think it feels like a trap number. I don't know why it's only 6.5. The team just scored 81 points. Texas Tech is, again, a Big 12 team where they're going to be able to score, but can they stop Oregon, right?
Yeah.
Since Bo Nix has been there, they've been an explosive offense. Forget what you knew about him at Auburn. He's been a totally different quarterback at Oregon. They run a real different system. It's more of a spread them out and throw it up and down the field with the running game that they lean on heavily as well. It just doesn't make sense to me why a team that scores 81 going to a place like Texas Tech, why they would only be getting 6.5. Now, to be fair, I'm not sure if you've ever been to Lubbock, Texas at night for a game. It can get pretty ruckus there. The crowd at Texas Tech is phenomenal. They have a really strong fan base.
It'll be maybe hot for a Pacific Northwest team.
Yeah, I mean, it's potential. Like they're predicting 93 degrees at game time right now. Like that's pretty warm. But these are some of the best conditioned athletes in the world, right? We just talked about what Travis Hunter did.
Right.
Now, everyone's not Travis Hunter, but like not everyone's going to play 140 snaps, right?
Right.
Typically, you're playing half of them.
Unless you score 81 in a game and you're just running up and down the field. Right?
That is true. I'm gonna take the juice here. I'm gonna take the bait, and I'll take the points. So give me the 6.5, and I'm good with that. I feel similarly to you in that. What does Vegas know that I don't? Right?
Yeah. I'm gonna side eye this as I place the bet, but I am gonna lay the number. 6.5 just isn't enough for me to scare me off of, Oregon against not a good Texas Tech team. So I'm with you. I'm gonna
Wyoming.
What's that?
They lost to Wyoming last week.
Right. I mean, come on. Let's get real here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm with you. What else are you looking at here in week 2?
All right, man.
Got a couple good ones left.
So we mentioned, obviously, we talked about Oregon scoring 81, and we mentioned that there were two teams that scored in the 70s.
Yeah.
That's Oklahoma and the Ole Miss. And Ole Miss has a competition this week. They're going on the road to Tulane.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, have you heard the news about Tulane?
I might have missed it.
They're expanding.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's going to be 4-lane.
I see what you did. I appreciate it. I love a good dad joke.
Oh, it's my favorite. It's my favorite. I use it every time I get the chance.
I'm like turning the gears in my head. Like, how's a college gonna expand?
Ah,
You
yes,
got me.
Tulane
You
to
got
four
me.
lane, baby, rolling right through freaking New Orleans.
Yep.
No, so Ole Miss scored 73 points last week, right? But Tulane scored 37. Like, that's nothing to be ashamed of either. I mean, your quarterback goes 14 for 15 for 294 and 4 touchdowns with no interceptions. Like, that's pretty freaking good
Right.
against a South Alabama team that, I mean, you could take them or leave them, right? But everybody knows that Lane Kiffin and that Ole Miss has a high-flying offense. The knock on them ever since the old Robert Kondichi days with the freaking Land Sharks is that Ole Miss couldn't stop a nosebleed, right? That's kind of been their hiccup, and they've really adopted this high-scoring, high-flying offensive style of ball that they play with Ole Miss down there, or with Lane Kiffin, excuse me. The Grove is always popping on game days, so they love to score points and get the fans hyped. But Tulane's a good team, man. Like they have ballers all up and down. They had almost 200-yard receivers, right? They had one, and then their running game is also spread out, right? Like you have 3 guys rushing for over 25 yards to include your quarterback each, right? Like they only rushed for 142 as a team, but they had such efficient passing offense that they didn't really need to do that. And as long as they can keep that efficiency in the pass game, I feel like they're going to be able to go score for score with Jackson Dart and those boys down from Oxford.
Yeah, and we also got to temper, right, that in quantify or qualify that 70 that Ole Miss scored last week, right? They played Mercer, who is a decent FCS program, but they're an FCS program, and they're, nowhere near the level of an Ole Miss. And, of course, with Lane Kiffin there, right, an offense is going to be pretty high-powered. But, the big thing that, for me, is, you mentioned it, the efficiency of Tulane's offense, I think can even the playing field, and they're playing in Louisiana at home. Tulane's not necessarily known for being a raucous environment, but the comfort of being at home versus, going on the road to Oxford is very different. So I'm with you. This is not going to be a rollover like they had last week with Mercer. The line's 7.5, I think is what it is, right? And I believe we're both on Tulane taking the points at 7.5, which I feel comfortable with it. I'm pretty sure that one's going to be in my portfolio this weekend. That 7.5 is going to be something that I'm going to put some cash money on.
Yeah.
I like Tulane. I like what they're doing. You mentioned the efficiency. They run the ball really well. They complete at a high percentage. They don't take a lot of risks on offense, but that to me helps negate some of what you're going to see from Ole Miss with Jackson Dart and those weapons that Ole Miss tries to deploy and hit home runs all day. So I like the pick here. I'm with you. I'm riding with Tulane. I feel pretty good about it. So let's go Green Wave.
Yes, sir.
One I want to talk about, Bama, Texas. I know this is sort of close to your heart because you mentioned last week that you've got Texas as your kind of dark horse for the playoff. They're still ranked number 11. Little bit of a struggle out the gates. Ewers didn't look super efficient, super effective. The Texas offense looked sluggish at times, but came away with a win. It's week 1. Sometimes you just got to tune up a little bit in week 1 and you put yourself in a position to succeed the remainder of the season. And that certainly could be it with Texas. Jalen Milroe is a fine athlete, a fine player at quarterback for Alabama. But I think what they could struggle with is some of the things that Texas could force them into. Texas has got a pretty athletic, pretty strong up-front defense that could slow down that Bama running game, slow down Jalen Milroe in terms of his ability to run with the ball and make him a passer. And I don't think that's what Bama wants at all, right? They want to be able to pass as a change of pace when they can get Milroe comfortable and get him open looks and get him guys in space. They don't want to have to make him a drop back guy because they're in 3rd and long all the time. So if Texas can force that defensively, I think they turn this thing into kind of a slogfest against Alabama. And I actually like Texas, if they are able to turn it into that kind of slugfest, to be able to do just enough on offense, because I think they've got a few more options. I think Ewers is a guy that when the play breaks down, he can make a play. When it's ugly, he can make a play. He didn't look great last week, but there were times last year, even in the Bama game, before he got hurt, he was beating the shit out of that defense. If he plays the rest of that game, they might knock off Bama last year, and that season changes for them last year, for Texas. But I've got Bama in this one because I just don't think they're going to be able to do enough offensively against a just stacked Alabama defense. We know they're stacked every year, right? It's no surprise they've got a stacked defense, but they got some dogs on the defensive side. Despite losing Will Anderson, who's probably the best player in college football last year, they've got some dogs on that side of the ball. So
they do.
I think they're going to slow this offense down. This isn't going to be – I don't think this game gets in the 30s. I think we're going to see like a 20-10 sort of affair, maybe 24-14, 23-13, something along those lines. I've got Bama by 9 or 10. I'm going to lay the points, but I do see a way that Texas wins this game. If they can slow that running game down and make Jalen Milroe a passer, they can win this game.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth with my pick here multiple times. On the graphic, it says Texas +7. As you started talking, in my mind, I was like, I'm just going to switch it to Alabama -7, right? But now I'm back to Texas +7, right? I love what you said about them slowing down Alabama's offense, like selling out to stop the run and forcing Jalen Milroe to become a passer, right? I think that Texas, if committed to stopping the run, has enough players in their front seven that they're able to set their corners on islands. And this Alabama pass, like the receiver room is not as stacked as it has been in the years past with, all the guys we say, Amari Cooper and Devontae Smith and Henry Ruggs when he was there. Just all the, you can go and list a bunch of guys that have come out at the receiver position. John Mechie, a bunch of dudes that came out of Alabama. Those guys are not there this year, right? And that's not to discredit the guys that are playing there now, because I'm sure one or two of them will be household names by the end of the year, right? As is tradition in Tuscaloosa. But at least for now, I think that Texas has enough guys on the defensive side of the ball to be able to pack it in and force Milroe to do play action passing or drop back passing rather than just handing the ball off or running QB runs, right? They're going to want to try to run that Dabo Swinney offense, power right, power right, power right. And if Texas is able to overload the box, put 7, 8, even 9 guys down there potentially, they can force Milroe, like you said, to become a drop back passer. And I think that's really where he struggles. He has all of the ability in the world, right? He could definitely develop and pick up those things as the year goes along. But as currently constituted, he is best in a run-first offense, to include quarterback runs, because he is a freak athlete, right? But I think Texas has a talent to go into Tuscaloosa and make this a close game, if not win the game outright. And I'm excited for it. It's a night game in Tuscaloosa. Yeah. There's nothing better than a night SEC game. There just is not. You cannot convince me otherwise. Maybe Happy Valley.
Maybe.
But Penn State always loses those games. So, No, I'm excited for that one. I'm glad you brought that up. That one's going to be a heck of a matchup. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Steve Sarkisian, I believe he's a former Alabama coach, right? Wasn't he on staff with
offensive coordinator 2 years? 2 years, I think, when they had Hurts. I think it was when they had Tua and Hurts, right?
Yeah. So it'll be fun to watch another disciple of, the great prophet Nick Saban come back to town.
For sure. It was a great game last year too, and if you remember, Ewers got hurt in that game, but Bryce Young came back and played injured in that game, and late in that game, he was playing pretty, reckless. Like, I've got to take this on my shoulders, and played, very, very well down the stretch. But it was questioning whether or not he should be taking some of the hits he was taking late in that game.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's shift. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me get your thoughts on Colorado only catching 3 at home versus Nebraska.
I think Vegas is still in a situation where they're going to try really hard to continue to make money, and they're going to try to get people to sneak their way onto Nebraska because they were the favorite an hour ago, right? I mean, the moment they ended up finishing that game against TCU, this line swung 5.5 points, and since then has swung another 5.5 points or 6 points. I'm putting a lot of money on that one. Honestly, that's going to be probably my biggest play of the week. I watched and listened to most of the Nebraska game last week. Stove, if you're watching, buddy, I'm sorry because he's a big Nebraska fan, but that was a pretty miserable performance against a maybe par Minnesota club. To lose that game the way they lost it, it feels like same old story, same old song and dance with Nebraska.
Yeah.
So I personally think 3.5 is not nearly enough to scare me off, right? It's a field goal, right? You're laying more than a field goal, and sometimes
it's 3 on ESPN.
Yeah, so if you're going to get 3 in the hooks, sometimes that'll scare some people off. It's not scaring me off. I'd lay up to probably 6.5. Honestly. Yeah. I'd probably lay a touchdown and be pretty comfortable with it, especially at home, right? It's in Boulder. What about you? I mean, you brought it up for a reason. Are you going to lay some ducats on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I watched the second half, or most of the second half of that Nebraska game. Mm-hmm. I just don't see how they score with Colorado. I just don't see it. They don't have enough playmakers, and if Shedeur can keep this up, their freaking freshman running back is a stud. That kid made a bunch of plays on Saturday that I did not expect to see coming out of their backfield.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I just don't think that Nebraska has the horses to keep up with the offense that they're running out on the field in Colorado. Pair that with looking over and seeing a live Buffalo next year, that'll scare the shit out of anyone.
I love the teams that have live animals on the field.
Yeah.
Georgia and Texas and Colorado. Like you and even USC and Florida State when they've got the horses and shit. Like I love that stuff. You put Oklahoma. Them on the field, I'm entertained as all hell. So
Yep. I'm there for all of it. I think Clemson should put a live tiger in their stadium and let
them loose too.
Yeah, just let them run around. Have a blast here, guy. Hey, this is Tony the Tiger. Introduce you to Dabo.
Yeah, those humans in the stands, they're great.
How about it? Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm laying up to like almost a touchdown probably with Colorado. Yeah, I don't think Nebraska can score with them, not based off of the things that we saw occur last weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Nebraska's defense is, I think, improved over last year, but we didn't even talk about Dylan Edwards.
No.
How about the game that dude had? 5 catches for $120. Like he was one of the guys that had 100. He was one of the most highly touted running backs. They kind of stole him away like they did Travis Hunter last year. He's a difference maker on that.
Yeah.
He can hit a home run from anywhere.
Yeah.
That long touchdown run he had where he just made that. Dude, the TCU safety had the angle and he just made it disappear. Like, by you.
Yeah, he pulled a Deion Sanders and just outran everybody.
It's crazy.
Yep. Dude's a freak.
That speed is different and you can't coach it. That dude is legit. All right, well, let's shift into a new kind of segment. So late in the season last year, we did some playoff stuff, trying to preview and predict who was going to be in. We're doing it way too early this year, and it's going to be fun. We're calling it our Tailgate Totem, and we're going to rank 6 teams each week. It'll be interesting to kind of see how things move and shuffle and shake, and I've had the biggest shakeup in mine from last week. Clemson's out. I had them as my last team getting in. Abysmal performance by them. So they are clearly out. Bentley, you've got Georgia as your best team in the nation right now. Talk to me about what you like about Georgia.
They're going to do it again, man. They're going to do it again. They have the best coaching staff. Bobo's offense looked serviceable with a first-time starter. First-time starter with not a first-time OC, but first-time playing with that OC, right? Like it gives you confidence seeing that like it's functional in the first week, and allows for them to have some growth throughout the season. They have one of the best offensive players in the country, Brock Bowers, at tight end. They don't really have household names at the skill positions, but in their defense, they didn't really have those the last 2 years, and they won national titles. Now their defense may not be as great as it was the last 2 years, but to say that your defense is not one of the 5 best defenses ever in college football is not really a knock, right? Like, okay, you have the 15th best defense ever as opposed to the second.
You had a legit NFL defense last year. Now you just have the best college defense, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh no, like I'm good with that. It doesn't. I don't feel any pause putting them as the number 1 team Their schedule gets harder going down the stretch, but I think their team gets better going down the stretch too.
Yeah, I'm with you. I worry a little bit about quarterback play with Georgia. That's my only worry, and that's why I've got them slotted a little behind Alabama right now. I think they're the best two teams in the country. You're 100% right. They've reloaded better than I thought they would be able to there in Georgia. They've got it figured out on the recruiting trail. They've got the brand name. They've got back-to-back national championships, which recruits itself. I worry a little bit at quarterback, and I know I just kind of talked about the fact that if you can make Milroe a passer, that he may struggle. But I don't think that there's a team in the country that truly can do that. I see situations where, like a Texas, they've got the bodies that could. I don't think they're going to. I don't think even like Georgia's defense is going to be able to make him strictly a drop back passer. I think he's like kind of in the same vein as like Jalen Hurts was at Oklahoma, where he can just kind of drop back, throw a pass when he has to a wide open receiver. But if it's not there right away, he's going to tuck, he's going to run, and he's a better athlete than you, and he's bigger than you. Like Milroe's bigger than Hurts, right? And Hurts was always kind of the bigger guy on the field when it came to matching up against, some of those outside linebackers and safeties and so yeah, that's the only reason I've got Bama over Georgia. I think they're pretty neck and neck in terms of defensive prowess. They're both fucking stacked on defense. I think they've both got playmakers in different spots. Bowers is a big difference maker, but I worry about quarterback play a little bit with Georgia. They had old faithful, old reliable, old fucking AARP Stetson Bennett the last couple of years, who really steadied the ship for them at times. But I slot them just below Alabama, and you've got Alabama just behind Georgia. I'm assuming you feel fairly similarly. Is there anything you want to point out about Bama and why you kind of separated those two?
Just because Georgia's been there the last 2 years, They both had quarterback changes. I believe in Carson Beck a little more than I do Milroe.
Yeah.
It's if you flip them, that's fine with me. It'll all work itself out by the end of the year. But right now, I just give it to Georgia because they've been there the last 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think here at number 3, we're kind of different on who we think is going to go undefeated in the Big Ten, right? I'm with you. If Michigan goes undefeated in the Big Ten, they're going to make the playoff. I've got Penn State. I finally have confidence in the quarterback position for Penn State. I think they've been able to really stockpile talent sneakily. They have playmakers on both offense and defense on the outside, and they've got a really good offensive line. They've got a really strong defensive line. That's why right now I have Penn State as the best team in the Big Ten. And I know it's super disrespectful that I don't even have Michigan at 5 or 6 here. I get it. But I kind of projected this to say, like, Big Ten has one team. It's whoever goes undefeated in the Big Ten, because I think Ohio State's going to struggle, and it might hurt some of that strength for the Big Ten because they've got some bad teams in the Big Ten. I don't know that Iowa's going to be really good down the stretch. I don't think that Nebraska and Minnesota. I don't know that Wisconsin's going to hold where they're at. So I could see like the Big Ten strength of schedule kind of cratering a bit if Ohio State does struggle. And I think they could, because that quarterback room looks really bad. If they fix that, maybe this changes. But for me, that's why I don't have Michigan up here, because I really just, it's one team from the Big Ten for me. Right now, it's Penn State.
That's fair. I like Penn State a lot. Again, Michigan's just been there, so I take the guys that have been there. They have the best coach. I believe in Harbaugh more than I do in Franklin.
Yeah,
and it's not to say that Franklin's not a good coach. I believe in Harbaugh more.
Yeah, that's fair. Rounding out our top 4, I've got Florida State. I apologized to them during the show. I didn't even have them in consideration last week. I talked so much shit about the ACC that I had Clemson in the playoff. Clemson went and laid an egg against Duke, who Duke took advantage of it, but Clemson did lay an egg. Florida State, they look fast. I talked about them already earlier. I don't want to harp too much on the same, but they look like they've got playmakers all over the field on both sides of the ball. Size might be a little bit of when they get into the playoff and play some of these other teams, size might be a little bit of an issue for them because they are not the biggest of teams, but they're playing fast and they're playing effective ball right now. Talk to me about Texas.
I'm just in on Texas, man. They have playmakers, like you said about Florida State. They've got guys on both sides of the ball, inside, outside. They have basically all positions covered. I think that they're going to go into Tuscaloosa and show the world, or at least the country this year, but they're here to play. Texas is back, baby. Hook 'em, send me to the playoff. Maybe beat Alabama this weekend. At least lose by 6. I just like Texas. I don't know. I'm not historically a Texas lover. Like I'm not a Horns guy. I don't know. I'm ready to be wrong though, and I'm excited to go along for the ride with Sark and those boys.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said last week, I think Texas is destined for a playoff, but I don't think it's this year. But they've got the talent, and they certainly, if they can put it together and get some steady play from Ewers, they could be there.
Mm-hmm.
You got Florida State kind of your first out. Penn State right there neck and neck with them. We've talked about both those teams already. I've got a couple of newcomers really in terms of who we've talked about. Notre Dame, I just think that they're as good as they've been probably in 25 years because of Sam Hartman.
Yeah.
Having that guy, a veteran who can make plays at the quarterback position, is something they haven't had in a long time. They've had some good, not great quarterbacks. They've had some bad, but could kind of mask some of their things with their running game and defense in past years with Brian Kelly. But I think this year, this is as close as Notre Dame's ever been to me actually saying they won't lay an egg if they get in the playoff. And then Caleb Williams with USC is kind of the known commodity. I just think in the Pac-12, I'm still a little worried about Cam Rising. If he doesn't play this weekend, it could be kind of a trap game for them, and it'd be a bad loss for them. And USC could kind of sneak in and be that team from the Pac-12.
Yeah, you're never going to hear me say a positive thing about Notre Dame. It's just not going to happen.
It's not
you give them to me in a big game, I'm taking the other side every time. I don't. Their coach is dashing and handsome. Got it. Like their quarterback he's played a million freaking games and has seen everything there is to see in college football. But they still wear that golden dome, and I'm not going to pick them to win big games. It's just not going to happen for me. And I may be delusional, and I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah.
And Southern California, I really, really, really would love to see them play in a playoff game, but they play in the Pac-12 this year with a team that we talked about. Utah, nobody wins at Utah. Now they get Utah at home.
Yeah.
It's still going to be a good game. Utah's going to be a tough opponent, especially if Cam Rising comes back.
Defense travels.
Yeah, they have to go to Notre Dame, which, again, not going to pick Notre Dame. Their biggest test is going to be November 11th. They have to go to Oregon and play that Bo Nix squad. That's going to be kind of the make it or break it, I think. They also play Washington, which could be like a sneaky tough opponent for them. They get them at home.
Yeah.
I imagine they go undefeated all the way up until that Oregon game, and that's kind of make it or break it for them.
Yeah.
I don't hold me to that. My opinions will change as the year goes along, I'm sure. But just looking at it, I expect them to outscore every single team on their schedule so far.
Yeah, for sure.
Or going forward, rather.
All right. Well, we've got a hard out here at 8. Stick around on the backyard page and catch the Blitz here in about 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Bentley, appreciate you, bud. Always good talking shop with you.
Yes, sir.
Another good slate of games this weekend, and we'll be sure to chat you guys up about it next week.
Absolutely.
We